All right. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you could all join us for the latest in the Live Better Longer series. Today, we are talking about scientific advancements in measuring our biological age. I am Kaitlyn Phoenix, Deputy Editor of the Hearst Health Newsroom, which produces content for Good Housekeeping, Women's Day, and of course, prevention. I love working on the Live Better Longer series because there's so much fascinating research being done around aging that I'm excited to learn about and to share with you through these conversations with researchers and other experts. As a reminder, all attendees are muted today, but if you have a question for our expert, please feel free to put it in the chat box and we'll address what we can at the end. Live Better Longer is brought to you by AFAR and Prevention. AFAR is a leader in making sure science happens, and prevention is, I think, one of the very best platforms for learning about science. Today, I am honored to be talking to Stephen N. Austad, Scientific Director at AFAR, because he is doing really interesting work that I know we're all going to learn a lot from. Steve, thank you so much for joining us today. And
You're welcome. So it's very nice to be here.
Thank you so much. I'm excited for our chat today. I think we're gonna learn a lot of new things.
Yeah, I'm hoping that I can translate it all into good layman's terms as well.
I'm sure you will be able to. And as a reminder, so you have a whole bunch of accolades. You're Protective Life Endowed Chair in Healthy Aging Research, a distinguished professor, and chair of the Department of Biology at the University of Alabama in Birmingham. You're also co-principal investigator of the Nathan Schock Centers of Excellence in the Basic Biology of Aging Coordinating Center, a program of the National Institute on Aging. And you're the author of, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Methuselah Zoo, What Nature Can Teach Us About Living Healthier, Longer Lives. So for guests who have not met you before, tell us what got you so interested in aging research.
Hey, well, my background is very unusual for someone in aging research. I actually was trained in evolution and ecology, and I got interested in aging research, believe it or not, when I was kicking around the savannah of Venezuela. And I was there to work on a project. I was a postdoctoral researcher that had nothing to do with aging, but it had to do with opossums. And these were South American opossums, but they looked just like the ones that we have here. And I discovered by accident that they aged at an incredible rate. My project involved recapturing them every month and looking at them, looking in the pouch of the females. And I discovered that within 3 or 4 months, they would go from being healthy, fit, prime age adults to being old. They'd lose muscle mass, they'd get cataracts, they'd get parasites. And I was just astonished at that rapid change, which I assumed that they're about the size of a house cat. So they would age kind of like a house cat, live maybe 10 or 15 years. But in fact, I never found one that lived even 3 years. And that observation just awakened this interest in me in why different species age at different rates. And that was really the question that motivated my research for probably 10 or 15 years before I realized, hey, this aging stuff would be interesting to people as well. And so gradually my work became less field-based and more laboratory-based. And at least for the past 2 decades, I've really been focusing on trying to understand human aging and using animal models to investigate it.
That sounds fascinating to me. Who knew about the opossums that they age like that? I didn't know that.
No, well, nobody did at that point. In fact, when I looked up in the literature, it said that they lived 7 years. And by that time I had tracked hundreds of them, and none of them had even lived 3 years. So I had to track down where that misinformation came from. This was previous to the internet. So it turns out that someone in the Smithsonian, had looked at a bunch of opossum skulls and seen a great variation in size and assumed that the bigger ones were the older ones and made some rough calculations and calculated, oh, they live up to 7 years. And I demonstrated that simply is not true.
Wow. Wow. So that kind of leads us into the first question I had for you on this topic is, let's kind of get into the nitty-gritty of today's topic. So you're talking about these opossums that people were saying were 7 years, but you realized that, hey, the longest you saw was 3 years. That's one's chronological age. So what is the difference between a person's chronological age and their biological age?
Yeah, so this is something that I think we all know intuitively. If I could make one generalization about aging, is that it makes us different from one another. From a health perspective, all 20-year-olds are pretty much the same, but all 80-year-olds are definitely not the same. One of my favorite examples of this is the fitness guru from the 1960s and 70s, Jack LaLanne, who at the age of 70 celebrated his birthday by towing 70 boats with 70 people in them through Long Beach Harbor while swimming shackled and handcuffed for over a mile. So that is not your typical 70-year-old. Most of us don't do that. One of my former colleagues, E.O. Wilson, the biologist E.O. Wilson, wrote 17 books after the age of 70. So that's how some people age. And on the other hand, some people at age 70 cannot climb a flight of stairs.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we're trying to get at the basis of, what makes some people seem much younger than they really are in calendar age, and some people seem much older. And I think we all have noticed this, right? We see people and we find out their real age, we go, oh my goodness, they seem so much younger or so much older. That's what we're trying to get at.
And why is this concept so intriguing to scientists like yourself right now at this moment?
Well, the main thing is, so for most people, by the time you're 80, you don't need a scientist to tell you if you're young for your age or old for your age. If you can swim a mile towing 70 boats, you're clearly young for your age. But what scientists are interested in it for is that we are now working on a dozen or more ways to intervene in the aging process to figure out how to slow it down so that we would all stay healthy longer. And we don't want to have to do that by waiting 50 years to see if this 80-year-old seems a lot younger than that 80-year-old. And so what the biological age discovery would help us do is to figure out in a relatively short amount of time, is this therapy working? Is this pill really slowing down the aging? That's the main advantage, because that will speed up the progress of research enormously.
That makes sense to me. It seems like a tangible way that this data can be used. So how is a person's biological age measured? If I'm understanding correctly, there are different ways to measure it.
Right. And what we don't know yet, which is almost the holy grail of aging research, is the best and most accurate way to do it. This is very early days, and I'll give you a handful of ways that people are looking into it. Probably the one that people are most likely to have heard of is by measuring telomere length.
Mm-hmm.
Telomeres are the protective tips at the end of chromosomes that keep the chromosomes from degrading inside your cells. And each time a cell divides, its telomeres get shorter and shorter and shorter. And so it's become common in the popular mind to think that tells us something about biological age. And in fact, in the early 2000s, when telomere dynamics were first uncovered, that seemed like it was really, really promising. And so, of course, anytime there's an advance like this, people are so obsessed with how biologically young they are. Someone will take a commercial and will start showing profits from it. Now, I have to say there are really much simpler ways as well. there's a surprising amount of information in just taking a picture of someone and getting, what I told someone once who was asking me, well, should I get my telomere length measured in my blood? And I said, well, you can, but you would do just as well at measuring your biological age if you asked 10 people on the street to tell you how old you looked, because we really are very, very good at that. There was a famous study done in Denmark where they took pairs of identical twins. And on one day, they asked people, just from a passport photo, they asked people to estimate their age. And on the second day, they took the identical twin and they asked people to estimate the age. And if the age estimates differed by at least 2 years, that twin was likely to die first. And so we're really very, very good at estimating people's ages. Another low-tech way that tells us a lot about a person's biological age is walking speed. By about the age of 50, walking speed is really quite well correlated with health, particularly on the low end. People that walk exceptionally slowly are typically in much worse health and have a higher biological age. So those are the low-tech ways. Well, no, people don't like low-tech ways as much as they like high-tech ways. So measuring your telomeres, you have to send your blood away, and it takes a bunch of fancy laboratory investigation. But telomeres have kind of fallen by the wayside in aging research. And that's because if you measure them in lots of humans, you'll find occasionally a 70-year-old that has the telomeres the length of a 25-year-old. And there are no 70-year-olds that are as biologically young as a 25-year-old. So it turns out the error in using telomeres is just too large. Another more recent phenomenon is using something called epigenetic age. And that just sounds like a highly technical term, but it's really very simple. Your DNA, this twisted ladder of nucleotides that you have in each of your cells, is not just that twisted ladder, that double helix as we know it, but it's decorated with all these little chemical tags attached to it. And those chemical tags are involved in turning genes on and off. And there are millions and millions and millions of these chemical tags in each of your cells. What we have found recently, what a number of researchers have found, is there seem to be consistent changes in where those tags are attached. And as we age, it's possible to predict something about age, biological age, from the location and the number of those tags. Now, that's probably the most, I would say, the most promising approach right now. But we still don't know exactly what it's doing because there's no obvious connection to aging. It might be like measuring wrinkles. Let's just imagine that the number of wrinkles were a good indicator of your biological age. Well, we'd have no idea how wrinkles could actually be affecting your aging, just like we have no idea how these tags could be affecting aging. But they do seem to be fairly accurate, not just in estimating the age in people, but in lots and lots and lots of animal species as well. And in fact, conservation biologists are very, very interested in it because one of the problems that they have is trying to figure out how old animals are in nature. And of course, the conservation consequences of having a population of very many old and very few young individuals is a lot different than a population where there are a lot of young individuals and very few old individuals. So it's not just in the biology of aging itself that these biological markers would be useful. Now, I have to tell you that it's the early days. And I think we learned from COVID-19 that the first results that come out in the early days are results to be a little bit skeptical of. Because science works by making mistakes and discovering those mistakes and correcting those mistakes. And so a friend of mine took some of his blood and he divided it up into into different vials, the same sample of blood in different vials, and sent it off to a bunch of companies who will do this. And he didn't tell them what his actual age was. What the results he got back were ages that claimed his biological age was everything from in the 20s to in the 60s. And so, again, this is a field that's not regulated. It's like the supplement field. It's not regulated. So there's no sort of oversight on how accurate companies are or how consistent the results are. And that's why I say that we're in the early days. It looks promising, but quite often, particularly in aging research, things move very rapidly from experimental stages in the laboratory to the market. They move too rapidly for my taste. But if there's a buck to be made, someone will be doing it. There are other things as well, more sophisticated even. Your blood, the liquid part of your blood, is a cocktail of thousands of chemicals. And there has been some recent work that by measuring the relative amount of those chemicals in your blood, that also can provide not only your overall biological age, but maybe even the age, the biological age of each of your organs. Because one of the things that we don't know for sure is if my heart is healthy, does that mean my liver is healthy? And does that mean my kidneys are healthy? There's a lot of reasons to think that is probably not true. Now, if that turns out to be useful in that way, then that's going to change everything. Because rather than just making you feel good because you got back this result that said, oh, you're biologically 10 years younger than your calendar age, this could say, well, you're biologically 10 years younger, but you know, your liver, that's 10 years older. And so you need to really pay attention to taking care of your liver now. So that would be a huge breakthrough if we could come up with something like that. And I have to say that artificial intelligence has been critical to all of these things. It's used in order to assess the epigenetic age, this other age, what's called a proteomic age. So all these things are coming, and they're coming, and they're ultimately going to be very useful for research. Now, I don't know what motivates people to want to know their biological age, to tell you the truth. I had my epigenetic age done only because I was at a scientific conference, and one of the pioneers in this field offered to do it for everybody at the conference. So I said, yeah, why not? And but I don't take that too seriously, even though the results were quite flattering, I have to say.
It sounds kind of like the Wild West still at the moment, and a lot is still unknown. And you've kind of touched on my next question already a little. It sounds like we don't, what's in this for the average person? It sounds like we don't really know just yet. You know, in the past, we've used things like cholesterol levels to tell us how healthy we are. But at the moment, do these tests give us usable information like cholesterol would give us in terms of changing our diet? It sounds like eventually this might give us different data points to consider. But what's in this for the average consumer at the moment? Do we not know?
I don't think we're at that point yet. Unlike cholesterol, which we know that tells us something about our vascular health, you know, our risks of having a heart attack or a stroke or something. This we don't really know yet. One of the things this would be good for is when people try adjusting their lifestyle. If we had really good metrics of biological age, or even better, biological age of different organs, and we could tell, I've been on this diet a month now, or I've been on this exercise program a month, and it's really done wonders for my biological age. Now, the one thing you want this to be changeable. You want to be able to change it if you, let's say, change your lifestyle habits, but you don't want it to be too changeable. If you come up with a different number in the morning and the evening, then you have to be suspicious that that's not really telling you anything useful.
Got it. That kind of, when you talk about lifestyle, that leads me to my next question. What causes us to age biologically? Are we doomed to whatever genetic predispositions we inherited, or can you really turn back the clock of your biological age with lifestyle changes? We always tell our readers, it's not too late to adopt healthy habits, but is it ever too late to age lower?
No, I mean, I think that's one of the things that we've discovered is that there are certain lifestyle habits. Now, turning back the clock is a mouthful. It's become very fashionable among scientists these days to talk about reversing aging. And I don't believe we have any way to actually reverse aging unless you want to consider reversing aging. I went to the gym and I never had gone to the gym before, and I lifted a bunch of weights and made myself real stronger. So now I'm 20 years younger. That I don't think, but you could be 20 years healthier. And I think that's the key thing. So about how important is genetics versus lifestyle? I think people overestimate genetics because there's been lots of work on this. And about 20% of your longevity is determined by your genes, which means that 80% is determined by other things, which means you have a great deal of influence over how long you stay healthy. And that's something that I think can't be emphasized too much. We now put 90-year-olds on weightlifting programs, and they get dramatically stronger. It's remarkable. So it really is never too late. I mean, there are people running marathons at 80 who couldn't have done it at 40 because they'd allowed themselves to, get out of condition. So you have a great deal. Diet, exercise, sleep. I mean, we really know it, and we know quite a bit about that. We know how to make you a healthy 80-year-old. Now, I have to say, what we don't know so well is how to make you a healthy 100-year-old. So let me explain that. I said that the effect of genetics on longevity is only about 20%. That's for most of us. Most of us who expect to stay healthy 60 to 80 years or something. But there are these rare, exceptional people who are healthy at 100 years old, regardless of what their lifestyle had been. In fact, I think that's going to be the subject of the next webinar in this series. But for those people, genetics has a much larger effect than it does for most of us.
We actually have a question from the audience now, an early one that's related to this. Can you talk a little bit about the protective factors for longevity? Like you mentioned the exercise and things like that. What are some of the things someone can do?
Well, exercise is important. And I usually just call it physical activity because people think of exercise as, you're sweating, you're dripping sweat. And some people just don't enjoy that kind of physical activity. But basically, more physical activity is better. Even if it's low level, it's better. I think it's becoming increasingly clear that both endurance and resistance, physical activity are important. It helps to stay strong because to me, health is simply that thing that allows you to do the things that give you pleasure in life. And so if you like to get outdoors and you like to hike, or you want to carry your grandkids up the stairs, or you want to, all of those things require that you stay physically active. And then diet, there's some interesting developments going on in diet, very interesting. And those have to do with, first of all, you want to eat within reason. You don't want to get obese, right? So eat within reason. But a lot of recent research is suggesting that it may be the timing of when we eat as much as what we eat that's important in maintaining health. So there are, for 70 years, we knew that if you took laboratory animals and fed them only 60 or 70% the amount of food that they really wanted to eat, that they stayed healthy much, much longer. And what we've learned from that, because there's been a few studies done on that in people, what we've learned is that people can't do that. There are rare individuals that can, but most of us, if you say eat 30% less than you want to for month after month and year after year for the rest of your life, we can't do it. These new diets, though, which came from animal work that showed that if you just reduce the time interval during which they eat, it had many of the same benefits as the chronic dietary restriction. So now there's a ton of research going on in these various diets, the most popular of which is probably something called time-restricted eating, or eat all you want, but eat for only an 8-hour or a 10-hour interval each day. Again, it's early days for the human part of this research. We know already it's very good for weight loss if you want to lose weight. We don't yet know whether it's replicating many of the almost magical effects that we saw in our laboratory mice and rats when we really restricted their diet. And one thing I should also mention is sleep. Getting good regular sleep, something that I'm really bad at. So I hate to mention it, but I feel I should. It's quite clear now that that's really important to staying healthy, is trying to get a good night's sleep. Now, what's a good night's sleep for each of us is probably somewhat different, but getting a good night's sleep is really important. And I wish I were better at that.
And that kind of leads into another question from our audience about stress. How much does the stress that our bodies carry physically and emotionally impact our biological age? And then related to that, if someone's differently abled or faces other physical challenges and physical age-related issues, does that impact how their body ages? So we have one question about the stress and then another one about facing ability challenges.
Sure. Those are both excellent questions. Let's talk about stress first. What we think from all of our laboratory research is that it's not as simple. I like to say most everything in biology can be thought of as a U-shaped curve. Too little is not good, and too much is not good. And so the thing is finding that Goldilocks point in the middle that's right. So there's a lot of research that suggests that small amounts of stress are actually beneficial. But too much stress is clearly not beneficial. And again, this is something that probably varies a lot by individual. I've been getting a lot of questions recently about the age of the presidential candidates. And one of the things people always bring up is, well, how stressful that job is. And I said, well, it depends on who you are. Before I got into science, I trained lions for the movie industry. So that's another phase of my life. And people say, well, that's got to be as stressful. You could be killed at any time. To some people, that's stressful. And to some people, it's not. To some people, it's a day's work. And so stress is important. Finding the right level of stress, the stress that makes you do things well. Because when we're stressed, it can turn on all sorts of protective mechanisms in our body. In fact, we think this is one of the parts of the time-restricted feeding, is that during that period of not feeding, that period of fasting, that maybe 16 hours, it's turning on it's turning on fasting physiology, which is basically a form of stress. And that turns on mechanisms that protect our DNA. It turns on our immune functions. It turns on all kinds of things. But you can overload that, and then it has the opposite effects. Suppresses the immune system, suppresses the DNA damage responses, those sorts of things. Now, the other thing about the people that are differently abled, that one of the things I like to point out is Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking, who from his 20s had ALS. You can't imagine how anything that would be more physically debilitating than that. He lived into his 70s. He lived virtually a normal lifespan and an incredibly rich mental lifespan is also. There's nothing about your physical capabilities that necessarily dictate how you age, but the same things are important. If you can't stay as physically active as you can, as mentally active as you can, try not to get obese. It's difficult because depending on the nature of your problem, it may be difficult to get enough physical activity. So you'll have to then watch how much you eat. But just because you don't have the physical capabilities of everyone does not mean you can't age as well or even better than anyone. Some of our greatest scientists, Louis Pasteur made his greatest discoveries after he'd been disabled by a stroke. So even if you've had some health problems, you can recuperate from those health problems if you incorporate good lifestyle into your daily living.
It's nice to hear some positivity in this topic, that I think we all want to hear. It's not doom and gloom, we can take a little control, because I feel like every year another candle's added to the birthday cake, and so many of us feel out of control that it's nice to know, okay, there are some steps that I can take. Now the next, I kind of want to go back to what I had originally wanted to ask you. So because this topic is so big right now, between researchers, and then also so many companies are coming out with tests for people to take at home to test their biological age, I'm wondering what you want consumers to know about these home tests. Are they accurate? Are they better for more accurate for certain people than others? What should we know about the deluge of marketing for these tests that we're being bombarded by?
I think the proper stance towards these tests is to be skeptical. Don't take them too seriously. If they tell you you're 10 years younger biologically than you are, you can feel good for the day, but don't let it change your workout habits or your dietary habits or anything. I mean, I think a lot of these are really aimed at human vanity.
Mm-hmm.
We want confirmation that we're as young as we think we are. We're as young as we feel. They will get better over time. But again, exactly what you do with the information. If you discovered, for instance, if one of these tests told you you were 10 years younger biologically than you were chronologically, what would that lead you to do? Completely abandon all of the lifestyle factors that had kept you as healthy as you are? Or we say, oh, I can ease off now. I don't have to pay any attention to my physical condition for the next 5 years. I don't think there's any action items that come out of these things now. We know the sorts of things that keep us healthy. And regardless what those tests tell us, that are still telling us. Now, if you have been sedentary, if you have not been active, if you had a diet and you wanted to take one of those tests and then go on this big emergency fitness regime, change your lifestyle habits, and you wanted to take that test 2 years later and see what it did, that's very good. But you wouldn't need that test to tell you that you'd improved your health a lot. That's the important thing. We know pretty much how healthy we are. If you're 80 years old and you can walk up 4 flights of stairs, you don't have anybody tell you that you're younger biologically than most 80-year-olds.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So I guess there are certain things that you should just take with a grain of salt when looking at these results if you do choose to take one of the tests.
Exactly.
Okay, got it. Now, and we have another question from the audience that's related to what we were just talking about a minute ago. There was an article in the Washington Post health section yesterday indicating that restricted eating hours is related to increased heart disease. Aging research is so exciting and evolving, and the public's interest in healthy eating is so strong. What advice would you give to any of us when we hear research that may seem to contradict other studies to help us navigate what may seem like mixed messages?
Yeah, so that study has been getting a lot of play, and I have to say that's not a published study. That was a
Mhm.
poster at a scientific meeting. And anytime you get one study that violates the conclusions of dozens and dozens of other studies, and there's been over 100 studies of time-restricted feeding in people now. So I would not take that very seriously. When the study is finally published and we can look at the details of the data, I suspect there's going to be some serious questions about that. One of the things I can tell you already, I know that the dietary information in that study is taken from this famous long-term study of people that relies on what's called food frequency questionnaires. These are detailed questionnaires about your dietary habits over the last year or 2 years. And I give that to my students every year to take my aging class. In fact, I give it to them twice. I give it to them once early on in the semester. I give them to it again towards the end of the semester. And I ask them, how confident were you in your original answers? And how similar do you think your answers now will be to the answers you gave me 2 months ago? It turns out about 50% of their answers are the same, which means 50% are different. So I have very little faith in the accuracy of those questionnaires. And also, that was not done in any kind of context where people were trying to figure out something about time-restricted feeding. This was just from questions that people have. When do you eat? How, what is your eating habits? So I don't place any credence in that study at all. And I'd be very curious to see it when and if it appears in a publication.
That is really interesting to hear that take on it. And it's a good reminder to us, to take a second to really consider when we hear these new flashy studies that we might not be hearing everything that's there.
Right.
And we have another audience question. Another topic in aging that's gotten a lot of buzz is the Dog Aging Project. And that brings up more questions about biological age. We've heard that smaller dogs live longer. What does this say about biological age? Does body weight or the size of the dog impact biological age? Or is it the genetics of the breed? And does it mirror how humans age? So I know there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
But we love our dogs, so we
do, and I love my dogs. My wife is a veterinarian, my daughter is a veterinarian, my son-in-law is a veterinarian.
Oh my goodness.
So I am very much involved in this. And the Dog Aging Project is a wonderful project. I can't emphasize how wonderful it is, because it's not only going to teach us a lot about the health of our animals, but it's going to teach us a lot about our own health. Now, this pattern of small dogs living longer than large dogs, that's absolutely true. It's very robust. It's true if you look at hundreds of thousands of dogs, if you look in Europe, if you look in the US, if you look anywhere. We think it's due to genetic. I mean, it's clearly due to genetics. So all these dog breeds, right? That dogs are the most variable size species on the planet. If you look at from the smallest to the largest, there's a 100-fold difference in body weight. Now, we've selected them for various things to make big dogs, be guard dogs, and little dogs to be lap dogs or to chase things into burrows. And we don't know exactly what we've selected for, but one of the things we've selected for is slow growth. And we find the same thing in mice and rats in the laboratory. Smaller ones live longer than larger ones. And it's true for horses. Small horse breeds live. Now, this is genetics, because these have been genetic selection. Now, is that true for humans? It's been a controversial case. It's certainly not true in the same sense. The biggest studies suggest that tall people live slightly longer than shorter people, but it's complicated because, and again, these effects are tiny. Smaller people seem to be less prone to get cancer. Taller people seem to be less prone to get heart disease. Now, we don't know why that is exactly, but because heart disease is more common than cancer, That's why you get this slight advantage for taller people. But we don't understand that. But we do know, for instance, and I published this paper. I have to publicize it. We actually looked at the Munchkins. Okay, the Munchkins from The Wizard of Oz. You know what I'm talking about from the movie? So those are people that are very small for genetic reasons, probably. They have what's called pituitary dwarfism. And if they were laboratory mice, we would suggest that they live a lot longer than normal people. So we looked up the age, because these are mostly all famous people after that movie. And we looked up the ages at which they died. And in fact, they're not longer lived at all. The women seem to be shorter lived, if anything, and the men about the same life as people born at the same time. And so I thought that was not only a fun project, because it taught me a lot about the Munchkins, but also told us something about translating things from mice in the lab to humans in the real world. You know, a lot of my colleagues think that humans are just a large mouse without a tail, and that we're not. Dogs actually are a much better representation of humans because they get many of the same diseases that we do. Mice don't. Mice almost all die from cancer. So the dog aging project is going to teach us a great deal. I'm a huge fan. It's having funding problems now. I'm hoping those get solved. But again, it's early on in the dog project. The nice thing about the dog project is we won't necessarily, first of all, it could help us establish these biological aging markers. But even without that, because dogs are so much shorter lived than people, we can learn a lot about how things that go on through the life. The other thing is, and we keep our mice in perfect conditions in the laboratory, same temperature, you know, always eat the same food. Dogs live with us. They live, you know, they live in all of our environments. They share our air, they share our exposures to pathogens, they share lots of things. So we're going to learn a lot more from the dogs than I think we've ever learned from the mice.
And sometimes they share our food that might drop to
that's right. Although don't tell my wife that.
We have another audience question. Many of us care about our dogs, and many of us care about how we look. Steve, you joked earlier about vanity, and I'm sure many of us are asking ourselves, how old do I look right now? A question from the audience: are things like wrinkles, white hair, or white hair an indicator of biological age?
No. No. When I say that people are very good at estimating the biological age of other people, it's a complex pattern, and our brains are very good pattern recognition devices. Gray hair is quite interesting. One of my colleagues studies it, and gray hair may be telling us something, because the reason your hair goes gray is that you have these stem cells in each hair follicle that adds pigment to your hair as it grows out. And what happens as hair turns gray is those cells fail. So they're not producing the pigment anymore. What she's discovered, though, is that can be reversed. Those cells haven't died. That can be reversed. In fact, there are some people, interestingly enough, that have undergone cancer chemotherapy and lost all their hair. And when it grew back black when it was gray before. So there's an interesting story to be told there. Skin aging is pretty much sun exposure. There's even a term, we call it photo aging. And I've got a picture that I use in my talk sometime of a 40-year-old Italian farm worker that if you looked at her face, you would think she was 100 years old. So no, it's much more subtle than that. And like I say, people can tell us from passport photos. Pretty soon, we're going to be able to use artificial intelligence to say, look in the camera, walk across the room and back, and artificial intelligence is going to be able to tell us probably a lot more about our biological age from that than all of the molecular markers in the world.
That's fascinating. We have another audience question. there's also so much buzz around potential gerotherapeutics. How does measuring biological age intersect with advances in therapeutics to extend life health span? Is there a great potential for precision medicine based on biological age?
Yeah, yes to both of those. And the first one, gerotherapeutics, is very hot. There's a half dozen types of research looking to really slow the aging rate, to target the aging rate as if it was a disease, because if we can do that, we can delay pretty much all of the problems of aging at the same time. And there's tons of good leads. Again, the biological age markers are going to be useful in the research, because right now, let's say I want to test one of these in a mouse, and then I do it in a dog, and then I do it in a human. Well, if a mouse lives 3 years, the study's going to take 3 or 4 years to do. Dogs live 10 or 15 years. It's going to take that much longer. If we can just develop these markers that reliably tell us this is working in 3 months in a mouse, in 8 months in a dog, and in 2 years in a person, that is going to accelerate the pace of research. And there's nothing in biology that says that we can't target aging. Just because, if you think about it, there are animals that live 500 years and there are animals that live 5 days. And biology has been able to create that variation. And there's no reason we can't delve into the secrets of how evolution has produced 500-year-old animals. This is a little plug for Methuselah's Zoo, by the way, my book, to teach us something about how we age more successfully.
You have unpacked so much today. This is amazing and fascinating. And it sounds like this is just a field that's exploding, and there's so much to look into and explore. And I'm so excited to see where all of this takes us down the road.
You and me both. I mean, I've been in the field for about 35 years now, and there's never been the kind of excitement that there is right now. And I think that all of the private companies getting all the biotech that's coming into it, that's going to be a huge a benefit to the company. It's just everybody's excited about it. We're not going to recognize the way we think about it. Let's think about this, though. Let's imagine we could extend healthy aging by another 20 years. Let's just say nothing crazy, but 20 years. Just think about how that might change the way we think about the trajectory of our own lives. Now we have childhood education, career, kids, retirement. That doesn't have to be that age. What if we switched all that around if we had more time to do it with? I think we're likely to completely revolutionize the way we think about our entire lives if we can stay healthy another decade or two.
Wow. I'm so excited to see this all happen. Thank you so much for your time today. I've learned a lot, and I hope everyone else did too. I think that's a good time to wrap up. I want to remind everyone that our next webinar, What's So Super About Super Agers and Why We Are Studying Them, that will be on May 29th. So make sure that you tune in. And also, in the meantime, go ahead and follow AFAR and Prevention on social media so that you can hear more about the Live Better Longer series and what's coming up next. And as always, I encourage you to support AFAR on the important work that they make possible. So I hope everyone has a great day and learned something today, and we'll see you again soon.